In February of 2024, on the same day it filed to go public, Reddit signed a contract with Google. The contract was worth about $60 million a year, and what Google was buying was conversation, not advertising space, not a stake in the company. Just the words. Close to 20 years of people arguing about laptops and lasagna recipes, and whether a hot dog counts as a sandwich, all of it gathered up, organized, and handed over so that Google could teach a machine to sound like a person. A few months later, Reddit made a similar arrangement with OpenAI, reportedly worth around $70 million a year. By the end of that year, selling this kind of access had turned into a real line of business. The company brought in roughly $130 million from data licensing in 2024, close to a tenth of everything it earned. And when Reddit's chief executive explained the thinking behind it, he put it in a way that is hard to argue with. The company's data, he said, should not be given away to some of the largest companies in the world for free. He was right about that. The only thing he got wrong was who deserved to be paid. Because Reddit did not write those 20 years of posts. You did. Not you specifically, perhaps, but people like you. The person who answered a stranger's question at 2 a.m, who left a blunt and useful review of a drill nobody else had bothered to review, who once talked a quietly panicking stranger through a knot of tax law they didn't understand. Somebody, somewhere, described what a particular medication actually felt like to take, in the plain and slightly embarrassing words no official pamphlet would ever use, and that description is in the pile too. Reddit owned the warehouse. The goods stacked inside it were made by millions of people who were never told those goods would one day be worth $100 million, and who did not see a single cent when they were. It helps to sit for a moment with the size of what was given. In just the second half of 2024, people posted something close to 6 billion pieces of content on Reddit alone, and more than 1 billion people pass through the site every month. And Reddit is one platform among many. There are the photographs on one service, the videos on another, the questions and reviews and half-finished arguments spread across the whole of the public internet, decades deep. No company could ever have paid a workforce to produce all of that. It exists only because a very large number of people made it, mostly for reasons that had nothing to do with money, to be helpful, or to correct something they couldn't stand to see stated wrong, or just to have something to say at midnight. That is the odd thing the models are built on. Not a product that was commissioned, but a gift that was quietly repurposed. The story we usually tell about artificial intelligence leaves this part out. In that story, a model is a kind of mind built by engineers, brilliant people in a building in California who wrote something clever enough to think. And the engineers are real, and some of what they built is genuinely ingenious. But a language model is not mostly made of cleverness. It is mostly made of us. Strip away the technical machinery, and the thing you are talking to is closer to an enormous average of human writing. Nearly everything people have posted and published and typed pressed down into a shape that can talk back. When it gives you a sentence, it isn't conjuring it out of the void. It is leaning on the sentences of everyone who came before, the way a river leans on every small stream that ever fed it. The computer scientist Jaron Lanier has spent years trying to get people to see this in plain terms. Data, he points out, does not come from nowhere. It doesn't fall from the sky or condense out of the dark. It comes from people, from the ordinary work of people. And there is no version of the machine that exists without them. Lanier describes a model as a kind of collaboration. Thousands, millions of contributors whose work has been blended together so thoroughly that we have simply forgotten they were ever in the room. Take the people out, and there is nothing left to have a conversation with. Part of why we don't see this, Lanier suggests, is that we would rather not. We grew up on stories about thinking machines, the ones in the Terminator films, the intelligence behind the Matrix, and some part of us is almost eager for the machine to be a real creature, even a dangerous one, because a creature makes a better story than a ledger of contributions. If we admit the thing is really just an enormous crowd of people folded together, then we lose the creature, and losing the creature would feel like a genuine loss. So we keep the myth. The myth is more thrilling than the invoice it happens to be hiding. He calls this idea data dignity, or sometimes data as labor, a phrase he and the economist Glenn Whale put forward back in 2018. The argument underneath it is not complicated. If your work went into building something valuable, you are owed something for the work. We accept that principle nearly everywhere. We only stop accepting it when the work happens to be a comment, or a snapshot, or a product review, because those things felt free to give, and so we quietly assumed they were free to take. And it isn't only the old writing, the material scraped off the open internet to build the thing in the first place. That is the first half of the story. The second half is quieter, and it is happening right now, every single time anyone uses one of these systems. When you correct the model, you are training it, rephrasing a question because the first answer missed the point, telling it, no, that isn't what I meant. Tapping the little thumbs up or thumbs down, all of it is teaching. Think of the last time one of these systems handed you a clumsy answer and you pushed back and nudged it toward what you actually wanted. That small flash of frustration was a lesson, and the lesson was recorded. The company gathers those signals, millions of them a day, and uses them to file down the rough edges of the next version. Inside the industry, the process carries a technical name and a whole apparatus of tooling, but with the jargon peeled away, it is simple enough to state. The product keeps getting better because its customers are unpaid instructors. Beneath even that, there is a layer most people never see at all. Before a model is ready to meet the public, other human beings have already spent thousands of hours reading its answers, rating them, flagging the ugly ones, writing out examples of what a good response should look like, and a great deal of that work is done by people hired cheaply, far from the headquarters, doing the tedious labor that makes the finished thing feel effortless and automatic. Two researchers, Mary Gray and Siddharth Suri, gave this a name a few years ago. They called it ghost work, the human effort tucked behind the curtain, so the technology can appear to run itself. The trick only lands if you never notice the hands. Now, there are honest objections to all of this, and they deserve to be taken seriously rather than waved off. The first is that people handed this material over willingly. Nobody forced you to post anything. You clicked agree on the terms of service, and buried in that wall of text, nobody reads, was language granting the platform the right to do more or less whatever it liked with whatever you uploaded. That much is true. But there is a real difference between agreeing to publish a comment and agreeing to become the raw material of a product worth billions, a product that did not exist and was not even imagined on the day you clicked agree. You cannot meaningfully consent to a use that had not been invented yet, and a bargain in which one side has no idea what the thing is actually worth is not much of a bargain. It is just the other side, knowing something you don't. A second objection is more technical, that it would be impossible to trace. With billions of documents flooding into a single model, how could anyone untangle whose words shaped which answer and send the right person the right amount? It is a fair challenge, and the honest response is that it is genuinely difficult. But difficult is not the same as impossible, and we have already solved a version of this once before. When a song plays on the radio, or over the speakers in a shop, or underneath a scene in a film, the songwriter gets paid, even though the money travels through a tangle of middlemen, and nobody is physically standing there counting each play. A whole quiet infrastructure exists to make that happen, tracking usage and passing royalties back to the people who wrote the thing. It took decades to build. It is far from perfect, and it still works well enough that musicians can pay their rent. There is no law of nature saying we couldn't build something comparable for data. Some publishers have, in fact, started trying, recently backing a licensing standard modeled directly on those music royalty systems, precisely so that AI companies would have a clean and obvious way to pay for what they take. The last objection is the one that sounds the most practical. Even if you could trace it all, the payment owed to any single person would be minuscule. Your share of a training set with 1 trillion pieces of text in it, divided out honestly, might come to a few dollars a year. So why go to the trouble? Lanier's answer to this is worth hearing out. He is not really arguing about the size of the check. He is arguing about the kind of world we are choosing to build. On one path, ordinary people are quietly made obsolete by the very machine they helped create, and then handed a basic income to keep them comfortable and quiet, treated, in his words, like passive recipients waiting for a handout. On another path, people are paid, even modestly, for the data they contribute, which gives them a reason to keep contributing well, and keeps them standing inside the economy rather than outside it, looking in through the glass. The money matters less than the dignity. And the dignity, as it happens, is also what keeps the data worth having. There is something a little absurd about where we've ended up. The most advanced technology human beings have ever built runs on the uncompensated output of the same human beings it now gets measured against. We made it out of ourselves, and then began asking whether it was going to replace us. Meanwhile, the money is already in motion. It is simply moving from one company to another. When OpenAI signed with News Corp, the deal was reportedly worth more than $250 million, and it was the newspapers who got paid. And this has become a genuine market now, not a fringe idea, and in the space of about 3 years, the going rate for access to a large body of training text has climbed from a few $1,000,000 into the hundreds of millions. Regulators have begun to circle. The Federal Trade Commission opened an inquiry into how Reddit was licensing its users' posts in the first place. Everyone's standing in this picture. The platforms that hold the data and the labs that want it, with regulators now watching both, clearly understands that the underlying material is worth a great deal. The one party still treated as though their contribution counted for nothing is the party that produced all of it. When these fights reach a courtroom, the same shape repeats. The New York Times has sued OpenAI over its articles. A group of book authors went after Meta for training on their novels. Reddit is now suing Anthropic for scraping its site without agreeing to a deal at all. Every one of those disputes is an argument about the right to be compensated for content, and in nearly every one, the content itself was written by someone who is not a party to the case and will never share in whatever gets won. The person who wrote the Reddit post is not at the table. Neither is the novelist whose book taught the model how to hold a story together. The argument runs between the company that hosted the work and the company that took it, while the person who actually did the work is somewhere else entirely, using the product and quietly training it a little more for free. Which brings it back to the line from Reddit's chief executive, the one that was completely correct. The data should not be handed to the largest companies in the world for nothing. He meant Reddit's data and Reddit's check. But it was never really Reddit's data. It was yours and mine and every person who ever typed something honest into a box because they thought it might help a stranger they would never meet. The company found a way to get paid for that. The rest of us are still waiting to be asked.